What's going on, everybody? We are back. Happy Friday. We got Bellator 294, 295 this weekend. Hasn't been something we've really done in the past, covering these Bellator cards. One of the reasons, we started this podcast pre-COVID or during COVID, I guess. And just, until the last couple of years, there just wasn't a lot of liquidity in the market for spots like Bellator, PFL. Obviously, that's changed over the last couple of years. And with that being the case, there's just not a lot of reason I see for us to not do this weekly. Obviously, some Bellator cards are worse than others. A lot of times you get 7, 8, 9 spots with minus 800 or higher favorites fighting. That's not the case this week, though. It's great. I'm going to try to make a point of doing this for every Bellator, though, irrespective of those spots going forward. Same thing for PFL. I doubt we'll add anything regionally like LFA. Just, again, it's a liquidity issue. There's just can't get much down there, and a lot of people just don't have access to those numbers in general. But, yeah, so, I'm excited to dive into it. We have two really good Bellator cards this weekend, back-to-back. We're kind of blessed. Kind of nice, too, given that the UFC card tomorrow is pretty mid. So, guys, if you like the show, drop a like and subscribe. We appreciate it on this show. It helps us out, helps with the SEO, all that good stuff. And, yeah, I'm going to dive right into it here. Obviously, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. Happy to take them. Again, happy Friday, everybody. Hopefully, we can make some money here on this Bellator card. First fight of the night, UFC 294. We got Anthony Adams taking on Sharaf Davlatmurodov. Davlatmurodov, decent-sized favorite here. Let me just take a look real quick. He's minus 235, comeback on Adams, plus 200. I had kind of hoped to bet Sharaf here going into tape, just given that it was a Russian taking on Anthony Adams. I'm fairly familiar with Adams' game. I had taped him for Contender Series when he fought Impa. I've taped him a couple other times. I don't really think he's the best grappler in the world if he ends up on bottom, and he tends to be gassy. But ultimately, looking at this fight, I just don't have a lot of interest. Davlatmurodov's interesting because I feel like he's a classic fighter who's going to have a high floor in a lot of matchups. Obviously, he went to a split decision with Anatoly Tokov. It's an impressive performance. My issue with him, though, is, I think he can be pretty low output on the feet. In terms of his grappling, he's a good wrestler, but I don't think he's the kind of guy who's a lock to get someone like Adams down. And by that, I mean, Adams, if you can chain your takedowns together well, like get him on the fence, work to a single, work to the body lock, he's fairly easy to get down. But first level, he's not horrible. So I don't think it's a stone cold lock Davlatmurodov gets him down. I sort of think he will, and I sort of think he wins this fight. I just don't trust Adams down the stretch, given his cardio, and I don't trust him on bottom. And that's enough for me to think minus 230 is justified. But at the same time, I think Adams is the better striker and the busier striker. And so given that I don't rate his chain wrestling much, it's not really a price I'm looking to lay. Second fight of the night, Chris Lencioni, Blake Smith. This is pretty interesting. Pre-tape, I leaned Lencioni. Post-tape, I kind of lean Smith, but I don't feel strongly about it. Smith's coming from CFFC. Chris Lencioni's coming off a somewhat controversial decision win against Cody Law, although I think the decision was probably fine. Cool fight. I kind of rate Smith as just he's like a sprinter, really. He's not terrible at anything. He throws hard. He's fast, can wrestle a bit. I don't really trust his gas tank, and I don't trust his defense that much. Like I said, I kind of think he's a sprinter. He comes out of the gate really hard, goes 100% into everything. But with that said, I think he's got major physical advantages against Lencioni here. On the Lencioni side of things, you have a guy who's a pretty good jiu-jitsu player, but a guy who, in my opinion, is fairly easy to take down and far too happy to play off of his back. Just not something you ever want to see, especially against a guy that's explosive like Smith, who's going to take him down. With that said, I do think there's plenty of scope for Lencioni to potentially submit him off bottom. I don't think Smith's the most positionally aware grappler I've ever seen. On the feet, it's probably competitive, except Smith, again, a lot faster, hits a lot harder. Lencioni is there to be cracked. And like Pepe said, this is kind of I think one of the big assets Lencioni potentially had in this fight was cardio, but he's coming in at 152. And in a fight that might be grappling heavy, that ordinarily would concern me just because obviously more weight helps you in grappling, except Lencioni's a terrible defensive grappler. If Smith wants to put him down, he can. And I think with the weight miss, it kind of lends some credence to the idea that Lencioni's cardio might not hold up under the pace Smith fights at. So I think it's a pretty volatile fight. I'm kind of intrigued by the Smith side. He's plus 100 right now. If it keeps moving wider, like gets to the plus 125 range, I'll take a poke. But yeah, the pick's going to be Smith here. It's an interesting fight. Moving on, we got Terrell Fortune taking on Sergey Bilosteny. This is my first bet of the night. I bet Fortune here. I bet him at slight dog and at evens. I kind of think he's still a decent spot here, even at minus 120. Obviously, with Fortune, there's always a bit of a worry. He can be flaky. His chin may not be the best in the world. He can certainly get cracked and put out. But when looking at this fight in the aggregate, it's like I feel like that is really the Bilosteny win condition here. I think he can crack Fortune early in this fight and KO him. But I really kind of feel like if this exits the first 3 or 4 minutes, Fortune is going to just absolutely own him down the stretch here. So, I mean, there's some credence to potentially live betting him. The thing is, I think Bilosteny's horrible on bottom. You know, we saw him in his last fight against Fernando Rodriguez, who's not very good, end up on bottom a couple times and just look clueless in those positions. I worry that Fortune bringing the smartest game plan because he hasn't in the past. But, you know, if he has the game plan here and he comes out diving on legs, I think he gets him down pretty easy and grinds him out. Even if he doesn't, Nick, if you go back and watch that Rodriguez fight, this guy Bilosteny, I mean, that was not fought at a high pace, and he was dead gassed 5 minutes into the fight. About as gassed as I've ever seen anybody. He won the fight by split decision, but again, he wasn't taking on a particularly good opponent. So now we have a guy in Fortune who's been fighting, in general, much better competition. He's the much better wrestler here. And even on the feet, I kind of think his boxing's a bit tighter, though he's there to get cracked. I'm happy to err on the Fortune side of this fight. I think he offers a lot more here than Bilosteny does. I think he should be probably priced in the 60% range, given that I think so much of the Bilosteny win condition is priced into an early round KO. Moving on, we got Achilles Mota. He's taking on Kenneth Cross. Cool fight. I bet Achilles Mota at about minus 152. I think there's still some value at the line right now, which it looks like you can get minus 155 at BetMGM if you have that. There's some minus 160s out there. I personally don't really rate Kenneth Cross. I tried to fade him when he fought on Contender Series. Unfortunately, Seiler was coming up in weight, and surprisingly, Kenneth Cross outgrappled him in that fight. Did not see that coming. But looking at the aggregate of Cross's tape, you know, I have some concerns given about this fight, given that Cross he hasn't been off for a couple years, but like there isn't a lot of tape from the last 2 years. I couldn't find any of his tape since Contender Series. So given he's young, that's moderately concerning to me. He obviously could make big improvements here. Like that could happen. But based on the tape we have, I kind of feel like I'd be hard pressed to believe he's made enough improvements to beat Achilles Mota at any consistent clip. You know, what we've seen of Cross is the man is a poor defensive grappler, very poor. He ends up on bottom. He tends to get stuck there. Doesn't have the best hips in the world. On the feet, he's explosive. He's a really big guy, and he hits really hard. Certainly has knockout power, but he also has no defense himself. You know, it's very, very easy to find Ken Cross's chin. And on the other side with Mota, you have a guy who's just a lot more tested than Kenneth Cross. Mota's fought some really decent competition in Bellator. Every time this guy's taken a step down in class, you know, he's passed the test pretty easily. And for me, the best path to beating Mota is really pushing a heavy, heavy pace on him and just trying to outwork him. Kind of what we saw happen in the Hamill fight. And even that was competitive. And I just don't think Cross has the cardio to do that. You know, when this guy's had to extend himself at a heavy pace, we have seen him gas out. Personally, I'm looking at this fight. I think Mota's got edges everywhere. Cross could finish him. But I kind of think if Mota gets on top of him, he's pretty likely to hold him down. I think Mota's the better striker, obviously the more tested fighter, and I think he's the better grappler. So I think minus 160 on Mota is kind of generous. I priced him at about minus 200. I've bet him here. Do with that what you will, but good luck. Moving on, Levon Chokley, Michael Lombardo. Interesting fight. I kind of leaned Lombardo pre-tape just because Lombardo, you know, pre-UFC, he fought on Contender Series a couple times, and the guy attempted takedowns like crazy. I think he landed 4 of 12 in his second Contender Series fight and went like 1 of 10, I want to say, against Dawkins Kyle Dawkins in his first Contender Series fight. In general, I'm looking to bet on guys that attempt takedowns in volume, so he was someone I was kind of interested in. And even, you know, on the feet, I don't think Lombardo is terrible. You know, he seems like a reasonably technical boxer. The problem I have with this fight is in taping these guys, all of my priors on Lombardo, I still kind of feel that way. I just feel like he's at a huge athleticism disadvantage here. A bit of a size disadvantage. Chokley is a lot faster, hits a lot harder. He's not a bad grappler himself. And, did we actually have kind of a decent enough, parallel between the two? Both of these guys fought Kyle Crutchmer. And personally, I thought Chokley seemed a bit more aware in the grappling in that fight than Lombardo did. Again, both guys lost. Crutchmer won both fights fairly easily. So put into that what you will put into that. But I do think Chokley's size, his speed, his youth give him pretty significant edges in this fight, especially on finishing equity. So don't really want to go with Lombardo here. I think the line's probably right. I think Chokley probably wins this fight by decision. Moving on, Danny Sabatello, Marcos Breno. This is a super cool fight. Sabatello obviously coming off a split decision loss to Raufeon Stots in the bantamweight semifinals. Marcos Breno coming off a nice win of Josh Hill. Breno is a pretty interesting prospect. I think he's a decent grappler, hits very hard, very, very explosive. And Sabatello, obviously, we know what he wants to do. He's going to come out here and grind you into the ground. Breno's not really a guy I'm looking to fade in the future. I did take a small poke at Sabatello minus 360. It was off market a bit, but I'm not really sure I want to hold on to it or not. I might just flip it before fight time. The thing is, I really think Breno needs to KO Sabatello early in this fight to win. And I just don't know what percentage you can put into that happening. I saw some people mention in the chat Sabatello decision. I don't think that's a horrible look at minus 160. This guy when Sabatello gets his hand on you, you don't really escape. I'm positive Breno's not a better defensive grappler than Stots. And if Sabatello gets him down, he's going to hold him down here. But there will be danger early in each round. Like I said, Breno, very fast, very explosive, and a decent grappler himself. It wouldn't be terribly shocking to me if he stuffed 5 or 6 takedowns here and was able to engage a few standing exchanges around. The thing is, it's if he's only going to get a handful of standing exchanges every round, in the best case, what percentage can you really place on the Breno KO? Personally, I just don't think you can place it that high. Maybe 15%, and that even feels high. I feel like his decision equity, you never say impossible, but it would be really tough to see. I kind of think Sabatello should be in the minus 450 range, 82%. I think it's a good fight for him. I think it's a tough fucking fight for Breno, even though I think he's a cool prospect and I'm rooting for him. But like I said, I'm not passionate. I think if you want to take buy down on the number and take the Sabatello decision, I think that's a fair shot. Like I said, I poked this minus 360 small. I'm not sure I'm going to hold on to it, but the pick's going to be Sabatello to win this fight. Moving on, we got Arlene Blanco taking on Sarah McMahon. And I had thought, honestly, when I first saw the line and when I first started doing the tape, that I might bet McMahon here. And there's a part of me that still kind of wants to. I don't really think Arlene Blanco is a very good grappler. She's got okay first level takedown defense, and she doesn't seem great on bottom. And on the other side of that, obviously, Sarah McMahon is, an excellent wrestler and has a pretty good top game. And so you would think those line up well for McMahon play. And I do think she should win, and she's a deserved big favorite. At the same time, though, I don't really love that she's moving up to 145. Not that I hate it, but that's always kind of adds an unknown into the equation that you can't really account for until you see it play out. Obviously, Blanco is a powerful, strong woman here. And so it wouldn't be terribly shocking to see McMahon come in here and struggle more than she normally does to get takedowns. And if that's the case, we kind of know how these fights go when Sarah McMahon can't get fights her way. If she can't get on top of her consistently, she's probably going to get finished here. And so I'm happy to avoid it. My lean, if it got down to minus 150, it's not going to get there. If it got to minus 150, I'd play McMahon. But otherwise, I'm going to pass it. Pepe asked if I thought there was any sub equity on the Sabatello side. Yeah, I think there's some. But, I think Breno is a pretty good grappler himself, and I don't think Sabatello's jiu-jitsu is the best. At the same time, though, it's Sabatello is probably going to get 8 to 10 minutes of top time in this fight, and he's probably going to get dominant positions. So, I think you have to factor in, a decent amount of submission threat here for him. Daniel Gerhardt asked, was I impressed with Blanco went the distance cyborg? Yeah, I mean, look, she's obviously a tough woman, like no doubt about it. That's kind of the crux of why I'm nervous about playing Sarah McMahon at Juice here. I just really, if you go back and watch her first fight with Cyborg, the 2 times she ended up on bottom was really tough to watch. Same thing if you go back to the Julia Budd fight. Like, if you told me for a fact that McMahon was going to come in here and not be at any physical disadvantages, I would lay the number here because I think she has a enormous grappling edge on paper. But I don't know that, and we've seen this before. And if I'm going to steer into variant, it's not going to be on someone who's minus 200. So happy to pass at the current line. Moving on, my favorite spot on this card, which is tonight's card, we got Tim Johnson taking on Saeed Soma. I bet Tim Johnson pretty big at early numbers. I think even the current number at plus 145 is a bit insane to me, if I'm being completely honest here. I am not like anti-Soma by any means. You know, he's obviously got some quality wins. He's had a lot of close fights with quality opponents, but I also don't think, I don't think he does much poorly, but I also don't think he does much well, if that makes sense. You know, if you're like, heavyweights often can get by with being poor minute winners due to power. The thing is, I don't think Soma's a huge hitter. So if he's not a huge hitter, well, is he a plus grappler? He's an okay grappler, but I don't think he's a dominant grappler. And so he's neither of those things. Does he have great output? No, his output's very, very low. He does a decent job of minimizing exchanges and kind of point striking, but he's small for heavyweight. He's only 5'11". He's got a 76-inch reach, and he's a negative minute winner. And so against Tim Johnson, it's like, yeah, Tim Johnson's 38, but like 38 is not that old, you know, for heavyweight. You know, we see heavyweights all the time age to like 40, 41, etc., and still look fine. And Tim Johnson, look, I both these guys are coming on losing streaks. Soma lost split decisions to Davion Franklin and Gökhan Sarıçam. I thought he won the Sarıçam fight, but that's neither here nor there. Johnson on a 3-fight losing streak. And I think the combination of Johnson being 38 with a 3-fight losing streak is kind of coloring the market here. But if you go back and look at those fights, Valentin Moldavsky, competitive 5-round decision. Fedor, that fight lasted a minute and 40 seconds. Johnson looked fine, and then he ate a huge right hand, flush on the chin, and put him out. I mean, it's heavyweight. That's what happens. And then the Vassal fight, Vassal comes out, tries to grapple him. Johnson shuts down the grappling for the most part, hurts him bad on the feet, literally dives into him and tries to finish the fight, makes one positional mistake. Vassal grabbed a single leg, was able to roll him over to his back and get to a dominant position. And Linton Vassal in round 1 on top of you is just not what you want, and he got finished there. So, I mean, I put some stock in the fact that he's on a 3-fight losing streak, but I also think it requires context. Tim Johnson's got 24 fights. The guy has fought many, many, many top-tier heavyweights and been competitive with most of those top-tier heavyweights. In terms of minute winning, I mentioned Soma's issues. I feel the exact opposite way about Johnson. Johnson's a pretty good minute winner. He tends to throw his shots straight, unlike Soma, who throws hooks. He does a really good job of keeping his work rate high and forcing guys into the clinch and working there. And in the grappling, he's not the best grappler offensively in the world, but he's not a terrible defensive grappler. And I think the Vassal fight is probably coloring the market's view of it. And I mean, Linton Vassal is an absolute monster on top of you. So I don't really put anything in that in the context of this fight. And like, I look at these two, Johnson's fought the better level of competition. He's got more fights. He's the much bigger man. As I mentioned, Soma's 5'11", Johnson's 6'3". Soma's got a 76-inch reach, Johnson 78 inches. We saw Soma struggle to get out of the clinch against Davion Franklin. And if he's struggling with Franklin there, I think he's going to have absolute hell dealing with Tim Johnson, pushing him up against the fence here. Johnson's a real heavyweight. I'd make him a decent-sized favorite against Franklin. And yeah, I mean, I favor Johnson in this fight. I think he's got the better work rate. I think Soma might be the better or more effective striker, but I don't think Soma's going to be able to dictate, you know, what happens in this fight or where it takes place. The only reason I make Johnson a small favorite and not a good size favorite is just he is 38. You know, maybe he is past it, But I think on paper, Johnson's got all the tools to be the favorite in this fight. I don't think him being a dog really makes much sense at all. I have a lot of money on Tim Johnson, so we'll see what happens. I mean, the line's coming in, but like I said, I still think there's money. Not financial advice, but I still think there is value on the line where it is. Yeah, I like Tim. We'll see what happens here. Moving on, Liz Carmouche, Deanna Bennett. Fucking weird fight, if I'm being honest. Like this is like, I literally watched their first fight earlier this morning because I was like, do I really want to get involved with Liz Carmouche and Deanna Bennett? And that didn't really change my mind at all with regard to this fight. Carmouche is a huge favorite here. I'm trying to find the current line. Here it is. Oh my God. Yeah. She's minus 550 on Bet Online, minus 800 in some spots. And the funny thing to me is, if you watch the first fight, it was a competitive fight. It wasn't like Carmouche came in and dumpstered her. Carmouche won the first round solidly, but it was pretty competitive. Round 2, she got taken down and mostly controlled by Bennett. And then round 3, they kind of just exchanged position in the clinch. Carmouche eventually got to her back and submitted her. And so I'm a bit shocked to see the line where it is, but I thought about it some more, and I'm not going to say the line's right. I kind of do think it's wide, but both of these women are older than they were then. I mean, Carmouche is 39, Bennett's 38. But I look at this fight, and I feel like Bennett's margins here are tiny. I don't think she has almost any finishing upside in this fight, whereas Carmouche, throughout her entire career, she's been one of the more effective finishers in women's MMA for years and years and years. She has 12 of her 18 wins are by finish. That's, I don't want to say unheard of, but it is kind of unheard of in women's MMA. So obviously there's a huge gap here in finishing upside on the Carmouche side. On the striking, Carmouche is a much better striker than Bennett is. So then you look at the wrestling, and I think Bennett could get 3 or 4 takedowns here conceivably and win a dicey decision. The problem is Carmouche is a lot stronger than her. So it's as likely, I don't think she's likely to get that. I think it's possible. And I think if Carmouche comes out as aggressive as she did against Velasquez grappling here, she will get Bennett down. And I think on the mat, Carmouche is a lot more likely in top position to dominate, whereas even Bennett in top position, I mean, she almost gave up a heel hook in the last fight. Her getting swept and giving up a dominant position is very likely. So I guess ultimately what I'm getting at is, even though the first fight was competitive, I do think Carmouche just has so many more paths to victory here. Like the Bennett path is very, very thin. I can see it, but it is very, very thin. So I kind of think Carmouche, I think the line on the Carmouche side is probably wide at minus 550, but minus 400 I think is probably fine. So there's not really enough there for me to want to play the Bennett side. Daniel, last most confident parlay piece probably would be Sabatello, honestly. Sabatello, yeah. I mean, there's nobody else on this card I'd really be dying to parlay on the 294 card. But with that out of the way, we move into the bigger one. We got Saturday night, main event here. It's Bellator 295. It's Raufeon Stots, he's not Brazilian. Raufeon Stots taking on Patchy Mix. It's a cool fight. It's a sick card, honestly. By Bellator standards, this is as good as it gets. Only fight I didn't tape here is the first one. We got Cherkovich taking on Kikuri. I didn't tape it. Not going to say anything about it. Moving on, we got Alara Joanne, Bruna Ellen. Yeah, I mean, could be a competitive fight. Probably will be. Joanne, I think, has more plausible paths to victory. I think if they stand for 15 minutes, it probably looks like a pick'em fight. I think Ellen can match her volume and probably maybe even outwork her on the feet. The problem for me is Joanne, she does attempt takedowns here and there, and I really, really don't like Bruna Ellen when she gets on her back. She tries to play guard. I don't think she's long enough to do it, and I don't think her jiu-jitsu is good enough for it. So I think Joanne, if she gets her down, can ride her out very likely easily. I think Joanne's got more finishing upside in the fight. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a lock. Joanne gets her down, even if she goes for it, but that is on the table. She is more experienced. I am a fan of Bruna Ellen, but ultimately, I mean, even though I think this is a competitive fight, it's not one I'm dying to get involved in. I think Joanne is a deserved moderate favorite. Moving on. Absolute shit show here. We got Davion Franklin. He's taking on, I believe, a Bellator debutant in Kasim Arias. Yeah, he is debuting in Bellator. I hate Davion Franklin as a fighter. I just do not like his game at all. I kind of think he's one of these big bodies that Bellator brings in that they're trying to turn into a star. Fed him a bunch of guys to knock out when he first got in there. And now that his level of competition is starting to take a step up, he is having a lot of issues, unsurprisingly. Which isn't to say he could get better, obviously, and potentially win more fights against a higher level of competition. But I think the base he's working with isn't very good. I think as a striker, he's obviously fast and powerful, but I don't think his technique's great. He wings too many hooks. As a grappler, he's an okay wrestler, but I mean, he seems absolutely helpless when he gets put flat on his back. All things that are concerning. And so obviously I saw this line and I saw Franklin chalked up, and my initial instincts to want to fade him. And I think there are plausible paths to victory on the Arias side. Like, you watch this guy's tape and he does try to grapple a fair amount. I just don't really know how much success he's going to have against Franklin here, trying to grapple. He's a bit of a manlet. He's only 5'9" at heavyweight, which is absolutely tiny. Obviously, Franklin is a fairly thick heavyweight. He's very, very, like I said, very short, not a great reach. And if he can't get the fight down, Arias's kind of default number 2 idea is, I'm just going to wing huge overhand rights and hope to knock you out. And that could happen. He could knock out Davion Franklin here. But I think if he can't get him down and it comes to that kind of fight, Franklin's faster. I think Franklin finds the target a bit easier. I think his length and height allow him to do that a bit easier against Arias here. So ultimately, while I'm looking to fade Franklin, and I will never be blown away when Davion Franklin loses a fight. I just think he has the tools to make this line justified. I think he's much more likely to finish, and I think Arias is going to have a lot of trouble getting his game going. So the pick for me is Franklin, no bet. Moving on, interesting one. I'm still considering pulling the trigger here on a long cruise. He's taking on Bobby King. It's a bit of a fascinating fight because Bobby King is kind of a guy who's consistently outperformed his capabilities throughout his career, but he's starting to get up there in age. You know, Cruz is only 33 years old, whereas King, I believe, is 39 now. Yeah, King's 39 years old. Obviously, he lost a decision to Gadzi Rabanov in his last fight. Can't fault him for that. He wanted a split decision against Keone Diggs 2 fights ago. That's a really nice win, as we'll get into next. But I do think, Bobby King is kind of reduced to, in most fights, having his perfect fight. I don't think he's the best grappler in the world, and so he needs to have his counter game working well. And anybody that can put out consistent output, I sort of think can outwork him. Combine that with the fact that he's 39, I think that causes some issues. And then you add that to the fact that nobody's really talking about this that I've seen thus far this week. But, I mean, a long cruise for a 45er or 55er now, I guess. Dude, the guy is huge. He's 6 feet tall, 78-inch reach. I mean, he's got 4 inches of height, 8 inches of reach. I think even with King's counter game, and I don't think Cruz is the best striker in the world, I do think it's going to be hard for him to kind of find his range early in this fight. I feel like Cruz is probably the better submission grappler. So, yeah, I sort of think Bobby King is fighting back-to-back. Oh, on the same night, actually. Shout out Bobby King Green. But yeah, I think I trust the work rate of Cruz a bit more. I think his height and length causes some issues for King. Plus, I just think there's a lot more of a chance that King's game could suddenly fall off a cliff. You know, the reason I haven't bet Cruz is I'm really sketched out by this guy's durability. And I know like Spike and Uros Medic are like mythical creatures in round 1. But like the way he got knocked out by Spike Carlisle was just like a one elbow, but basically killed him. And then Medic, it seemed like the first half-speed jab Medic hit him with, he just melted. Maybe I'm putting too much stock in that, but this guy, given his frame, definitely cuts a lot of weight, and so his durability is something that kind of scares me. If he moves to significant plus money, I think I'd probably take a poke here. Cruz is going to be the pick, but I think there's enough volatility here that I'm not really trying to get involved unless we get a move out to like the plus 120, plus 130 range. Moving on, Keone Diggs, Weber Almeida. I'm really fucking pissed off about this fight. to be honest. Like, I was pretty sure on Wednesday night that I was going to bet Keone Diggs. I went to sleep and he was minus 140. I woke up and the line had gotten completely smoked and he was up to minus 185. As a result, I'm passing at the current number here. But with that said, I think it's a pretty good fight for Diggs. I really do not like Weber Almeida's game whatsoever. He's he's fast and explosive. Like, he's extremely quick on the counter. But beyond that, he has like tragically low output. Like, the guy just does not throw strikes at all. He can't really grapple. When a pace does get pushed on him, he has wilted with his gas tank. You know, Ryan Lilly in his last fight, Ryan Lilly is not a very good fighter, and he went to split decision with him sheerly because Lilly just kind of existed in his face. Like, he had all the tools to dominate Lilly, and they went to a split decision. And now he fights a guy in Keone Diggs who, first of all, I don't like that Almeida throws hooks. Like, the guy just doesn't have straight shots. But Diggs is going to keep shots in his face here. He keeps a high pace, or I don't want to say a high pace, but a moderate pace, which to Almeida is high. And he's going to throw shots right down the pipe. So I kind of think the way Diggs strikes, it's going to enable him to land on Almeida first before Almeida can hit him. I think calf kicks are going to be very, very available for Diggs in this fight, which could be a problem for Almeida. And I think an interesting aspect of this fight that probably hasn't gotten enough play is Diggs grappling. You know, Diggs prior to his last two fights was grappling quite a bit. Obviously, in his last two fights, he's fighting Bobby King and Daniel Weichel, guys who are much harder to grapple, or his last three fights, who are much harder to grapple than the guys he's been fighting prior. But I kind of think he might come in here and just wrestle off the bat. And if he can get Almeida down, I think he's going to absolutely dominate him in that position. Both guys are old. Diggs is 36 years old. Almeida's 35. But to me, Diggs seems more about it. I think he's got a lot more tools for this matchup. I think he's got better cardio, and I think he's got the clear grappling edge. Again, I'm hoping money on the Almeida side comes in. I am interested in Diggs around like minus 160 or lower. Current price is, I believe, minus 205 now on Bet Online. So it seems like the money's moving to the Diggs side of things. But yeah, Keone Diggs is going to be the pick here. Moving on, I have a bet here. We got Sumiko Inaba taking on Vita Ortega. I bet Ortega at about plus 140. I still think this is a pretty good line where it is right now at plus one. If you can get any plus money on Ortega, I think it's a good shout. Personally, I think Inaba's not a bad prospect. Like, I don't really hate her game. She keeps a fairly high pace. Her kicks are pretty solid. She obviously has plus power for women's MMA, which tends to be a cheat code. But she's also fought really the worst of the worst here. I mean, her best win in MMA right now is Randy Field, and Randy Field is, I mean, she's just not a good fighter. And so she hasn't been tested. I think her defense can be a bit suspect at times. And now she's taking a really gigantic step up in competition here with Vita Ortega. And in this fight, like, I don't really think she can get Ortega to the mat, not easily. And I think if she does get her there, it's going to be really hard for her to hold her there. And on the feet, yeah, I mean, Inaba can keep a pretty high pace, but Ortega's going to keep coming. She can match that pace, and she's going to throw her shots again straight and keep them in the face of Inaba in this fight. Between the two, Ortega's fought just, I mean, the much better level of competition. Like, you want to go back, Ortega's last 6 fights, she beat Emily Ducati, beat Denise Keelholtz, lost to Alima Mae McFarland in a fight that she was winning, and that got stopped because of a cut on her forehead, lost to Alejandra Lara, beat Desiree Inez, finished Vanessa Porto. I mean, she's really fought a quite high level of competition for Bellator female MMA against Inaba, who's fought nobody. I trust Ortega a lot more in this spot. I think she's a slightly better minute winner, obviously more tested. I think she should be in the minus 125, minus 150 range here. For me, this is a fairly easy bet if you're getting Ortega as an underdog. Pepe shouting out Ortega ITD and plus 1400 sub. I don't think that's bad. That's bad either. And I think Inaba's grappling might be a bit sketchy. You know, she's looked kind of dominant doing it, but again, she's been fighting women who look quite poor on the mat otherwise. So yeah, War Ortega this weekend. And if you want to tell something, Pepe throwing a good one out there for the people. Moving on, Kai Kamaka III. He's taking on Adley Edwards. I don't have a ton to say here. Edwards I mean, he's 30. I believe he's 33 years old. It's not like he's a young prospect. Yeah, he's 33. Not a super young prospect. I don't hate Edwards' process. The guy keeps an extraordinarily high pace and likes to grapple a lot. The problem is, I don't think his gas tank is great for the pace that he keeps. He's quite hittable on the feet, and in his grappling, I just don't think it's going to be effective against this level. You look at the guys he's had success grappling. It's not really chain wrestling or anything like that. It's just he's kind of just hitting his double legs on his initial entry, and I don't really think it's quick enough, or he's getting low enough on the hips for that to really be successful at this level, especially against a guy like Kai Kamaka. Kamaka's the younger fighter by 5 years. He's 28 years old. He's obviously fought much better competition. He's more experienced. Kamaka, kind of a tragedy that he's not in the UFC anymore. Flat out got robbed by TJ Brown, and then, also got robbed because of a point deduction against Danny Chavez. But Kamaka's a good fighter. He lost a split to Justin Gonzalez, who we'll get to next, and that was a very competitive fight. He looked great in his next fight. I think in terms of this fight, I think he's got Edwards covered everywhere. Again, I'm not, had I taped it earlier in the week, I might have laid the number, but I'm not going to lay minus 250 on Kamaka just because if I'm laying minus 250, even though I think Kamaka is the better grappler, I want someone who's proactive about it, and he's not, and he hasn't historically been the best finisher in the world. But I do think he should be able to sprawl and brawl pretty effectively here. I think he's the better striker. I think he's the better hitter, and I think he's definitely got the better cardio. I think Kamaka should be fine. I think the current price is fine as well. Moving on, Mads Burnell, Justin Gonzalez. I don't have a bet here yet. I'm considering a bet on Burnell if he moves to dog. I'm not like super passionate about it, and I am still a little butthurt over Burnell losing to Adam Boric in the way he did and just not even pursuing the grappling. Obviously, Burnell has not looked good in his last two fights, and that's kind of not a bummer, but it is a bummer because I'm a fan of Mads Burnell. So it's kind of sucked to see like what's gone on with him, but he's taken a bit of I don't know if I'd call Gonzalez a step down from Carvalho, but from Borics to, he fought Emmanuel Santich and Adam Borics the two fights before that. So it is kind of continuing a step down in competition here. And I like Justin Gonzalez's game, to be clear. I think he's a pretty good wrestler. I think his striking is pretty good too. My issue with him in the context of this fight is Gonzalez tends to be mostly single power shots against a guy like Burnell, who Burnell's obviously known for his jiu-jitsu, but when Burnell is striking, he tends to push a pretty heavy pace, pushes the jab out there a lot, hits the body a lot. And I kind of think that pace could give Gonzalez some issues. We saw when Gonzalez fought Kamaka was able to stick him with the jab quite a bit in that fight. And Burnell was just keep that out there all fight when they're on the feet. And so I think it's a competitive fight. I kind of lean Burnell just I think he's fought the better competition over the aggregate of their careers and had success doing it. In the grappling, I don't know if Burnell can take him down or not. It's kind of weird. I do not think Burnell is likely to dominate the grappling. At the same time, though, I can't get Jake Childers taking Gonzalez's back really out of my head. But that fight was 4 fights ago, and Gonzalez, he's a fairly young fighter, so I don't know how much stock to put in it. I kind of think Gonzalez is going to keep Gonzalez did beat Kamaka in Hawaii. I kind of think Gonzalez keeps it upright. I do slightly lean to Burnell just because, again, like I said, I think the output's a bit more reliable, and I do think it's a decent buy low spot, but I'm not going to lay a minus number. Again, like a lot of these fights, if the line moves another 20, 30 cents, I'll take a small poke at Burnell here, but happy to pass it unless that happens. Moving on, we got Yancy Medeiros, Charlie Leary. This is kind of a funny fight. I'm not going to bet this fight, but I am kind of surprised to see Yancy Medeiros as chalked up as he is. I love Yancy, obviously was in the UFC forever, but Yancy Medeiros, not exactly the kind of guy that comes to mind when you're thinking about a minus 350 fighter. The guy tends to be a brawler for most of his career. He's been hurt a number of times. He's shown some issues in the grappling here, and he's fighting a guy in Charlie Leary who's also kind of a brawler. Now, of the two, Medeiros has obviously fought and had success against much better guys, and I think he's a better brawler than Leary is. He's a bit long. I don't know if he's longer or not, actually. Leary's kind of a gangly MFer as well. No, Leary actually, yeah, he's 1 inch longer reach. So it's about the same. But I do think Medeiros, he's a bit faster and I think a bit more effective. I think he's going to turn. Wow, is that real? Borgen Gooch got scrapped. That's kind of a bummer. I do think Medeiros is going to touch Leary's chin a lot in this fight. But I also think Leary's going to touch Medeiros' chin a lot. You know, I cannot recall many fights where Yancey entered the fire and didn't get touched. So I think it's interesting in that respect. And I also, again, I don't really want to bet Leary because like I hate betting guys like taking a step up like this. But Leary, I mean, he'll mix in grappling from time to time. And Medeiros, you know, he can be tough to get down at times. But when he's been put on flat on his back, he has not looked very good for most of his career. So I do think there's potentially some grappling equity there on the Leary side. That said, I'm not going to bet a side here. It's going to be a fun brawl. I do kind of think, like right now, I'm seeing the under 2.5 at -120. And I think that's pretty good. And I am probably going to take a poke at that. So, yeah, I mean, the pick's going to be Medeiros just because I think his pedigree is a bit better and I think he's a bit more dangerous than Leary is. But I think these guys are going to probably swing till someone dies here. So we'll see what happens. Up next was supposed to be Raymond Borg and Kyoji Horiguchi, but apparently that fight is off here. We will. Yeah, so I guess we're not going to talk about Ray Borg and Kyoji Horiguchi. I candidly thought Kyoji was going to smoke him, but fight's off. We move on. We got Aaron Pico, James Gonzalez. Aaron Pico's a huge favorite. Aaron Pico deserves to be a huge favorite. James Gonzalez is a fun fighter. He beat Cody Law. I believe it was his last fight. No, he beat Vikas Cerulli his last fight. But yeah, I mean, Gonzalez is a pretty solid workman-like fighter. He fights out of the Longo Weidman MMA as well with Aljo and all those guys out there. Decent jiu-jitsu. He's a decent striker. Relatively low output, though. I can't bet him against Aaron Pico, though. Pico is just an absolute Terminator. High output, excellent boxer, super fast, and Pico's wrestling is just next level. Might be the best at 45 in Bellator. Might be the best at 45 in the UFC. I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll see one day. And the guy's cardio is just off the charts. For a guy that fights with as much explosive energy as Pico does, it's truly shocking that the guy just doesn't seem to slow down. Might prompt one to ask some questions about why that is. But I think Pico is... Mr. X says, wouldn't bet Pico -800 for shoulder not popping out. Yeah, I mean, I'm not advocating to bet Pico here at all. But I do think... I think Pico should dominate this fight. I don't really see many outs other than Gonzalez clipping Pico, which, I mean, not impossible. We've obviously seen Pico clipped a number of times in his career. I actually think, if anything, the over is kind of interesting at +140. Gonzalez is a pretty good submission grappler. And, I mean, Pico did lose as a huge favorite in his last fight, but he also was injured. So I am very high on Aaron Pico. But I think the over is kind of interesting because I don't think Gonzalez is going to melt. He's a very, very tough fighter. And I mean, if Pico does what he's been doing in his last few fights and takes the path of least resistance here, he's going to be grappling. So I like over here. I think Pico gets it done. Moving on, Alima Lam McFarland taking on Kana Watanabe. Kind of a hard fight to get a read on. I guess my gut is the line is okay. Current line on it is Watanabe -140, McFarland +120. I do think McFarland might be the better striker here. The biggest problem for me is it's just a matter of really horsepower. Like, then is really all you can call it, I think. You know, Watanabe, she's a very physical woman, very, very strong. And while I think McFarland's better on the feet by an okay margin, Watanabe obviously hits harder. You know, I know McFarland is known as being a grappler, but the last time we saw her lock up with another really physical woman who tried to grapple her was Juliana Velasquez. I bet McFarland in that fight because I kind of thought she could test Velasquez there where she hadn't been tested before. And instead, what we saw was Velasquez kind of own her on the ground. I think Watanabe's probably a better grappler than Velasquez. And so if it stays standing, I think McFarland's a decent look here. But I just have this feeling that Watanabe is just way too strong for her and is just going to be able to overpower her. Yeah, so it could be a competitive fight, but I think there's a lot of scope for Watanabe winning this fight on the mat if she gets it there. So I'm happy to pass it. I mean, I definitely am not trying to bet, even though I think Kana could end up looking like value. Again, it's like split with Alejandra Lara, got knocked out by Carmouche. I'm not really trying to bet her as a favorite against McFarlane, especially McFarlane fighting at home. So yeah, pass for me. I lean Watanabe though. I think she's just too strong for her. And then we get the main event. Raufeon Stots taking on Patchy Mix. Very cool fight. I did a lot of tape on this fight, and I ultimately came away feeling nothing at all, really. I came away excited to watch the fight more so than anything else. You know, Stots might be, the best defensive wrestler, maybe certainly in the weight class in Bellator, but maybe in MMA in general, or 135 MMA in general. The guy's got incredible hips. He's got a great sprawl. I will say, though, if you can get Stots to the ground, I think he can give up some positions. We saw him willingly give up the back to Sabatello a few times in that fight. And as we know with Patchy Mix, if you give up the back to him, you don't get out of those positions. The other issue I have with Stots' grappling is, while I think he's elite at keeping the fight upright, we have seen this guy get cage pushed against the fence a number of times, and he doesn't really seem to have a great idea of how to dig a hard underhook and disengage off the cage. So, I think it's going to be really tough for Mix to get this fight down. I really, really do. But if he does, there's obviously a lot of scope for him taking Stots' back, finishing, and or just riding him out for rounds, similar to the Gooch fight. And even if he can't, if he pushes it aggressively enough, I could see a lot of cage push coming from Mix throughout this fight. We saw that happen against Sabatello a bit. We saw that happen with Juan Archuleta quite a bit. I think Stots can be pushed against the cage, and I think that could happen here. On the feet, I favor Stots. I think he is the more technical striker. And I think if he decides to throw his kicks low, given it's southpaw versus southpaw, could have a pretty significant impact on the fight. But at the same time, Stots is a pretty minus-minute winner. He really, really is. And he's going to – Magomedov is not a bad striker, and we just saw Mix compete – not just competing, but winning the striking there. And given that Stots just doesn't throw a lot, I think Mix can compete in that area. And so it's a very, very interesting fight. I think Stots is the more technical striker. I think he will land on Mix throughout this fight. I think if he were to go to low kicks here, he could have huge success against Mix, especially with those skinny legs. But I ultimately think standing minutes are going to be competitive. I think grappling exchanges will be competitive, but I think that, again, there's more scope for Mix holding him against the fence, and the potential of Mix getting to a dominant position is higher than Stots. And so with all of that being said, I kind of think the line where it is now, Mix minus 123, he's minus 130 in places, I think that's about right. I really, really wanted to bet Stots, but yeah, and Joe just said this in the chat, Patchy's tough to get inside on. You saw Magomed trying to figure it out. I do think down the stretch in this fight, especially if Patchy pushes the grappling hard early, you could see Stots kind of start to find the range a lot more often, and you might see Patchy slow a bit. But yeah, I think it's a very competitive fight, but I sort of lean the Mix side, and I'm kind of surprised by that because I do rate a lot of what Stots does quite highly, but I think matchup wise, I think it's a decent spot for Mix. I think if you got Mix dog money, that's awesome. I wouldn't really be dying to play any props here. It's kind of like a funk. If anything, I'd play over, but Mix is so dangerous when he gets to the mat. I'm just really, I'm not trying to fade that, especially, yeah. Because I think Stots could attempt to wrestle here, and we obviously saw what happened when Magomed tried to do that. But yeah, the pick's going to be Mix, I think. I think it's a very competitive fight. I think it's a fun fight. I'm excited to see it. I don't have a bet on it. Just to recap, my bets on the weekend thus far, they're Tim Johnson. I still like him at the current price right now. Tyrell Fortune, same deal there. Achilles Mota and Veda Ortega. Couple other spots I'm keeping an eye on. If I end up pulling the trigger, I'll tweet it out. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the show. Like I said, I'm going to try to do these a lot more often, especially when we get cards like this where it's not a whole lineup of minus 1,000s on it. So yeah, Please, if you like the show, drop a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Lags would really appreciate it. It would help the channel out a lot. Hope you guys have a great Friday. Hope you have a great weekend. Hope you enjoy the fights, and I hope everybody makes money. Peace.